Consider supporting Archaeosoup on Patreon for as little as $1 per month. Link available in the video description. Hello and welcome back to another book review. Today I want to travel a little further down the pathway that I established last time. You seem to really appreciate my earnest review and recommendation for Stephen Beastie's Cross-Sections Castle, a book that I've loved since I was a child and that I still find educational and entertaining to this day. And in a similar vein, therefore, today I want to briefly share with you and recommend a book that I have absolutely adored all my life, and that in some respects is responsible, I think, for me becoming the type of archaeologist I am today. I speak, as you know from the video title, of the Saga of Erik the Viking. This book was published in 1983 by Pavilion Books, written by Terry Jones, with illustrations by Michael Foreman. It had an initial RRP of £4.99, although you have to remember a pound was worth a lot more back then. He says, sounding like a little old man. At the moment, though, you can get this book for as little as a penny on Amazon, depending on the edition and the format. But if you want the original sort of hardback edition that I have here, it's as much as £8.64 plus postage on that website. This book is undeniably one of my all-time favourite books of any sort, at all whatsoever. But ironically, I kind of forgot about it for a good 15 years. And what I mean by that is to say that this book, and especially the illustrations in this book, are instrumental and fundamental building blocks of parts, I think, of my imagination and my psyche, because this book was read to me when I was 4 years old by my dad. Unfortunately, my dad passed away when I was 5, so it was a strange, heady mixture of emotions relating to him and that time and this book, that meant that over time, as I grew up, because no one was reading it to me anymore, the book did kind of sort of just pass into slight obscurity. But the images, the story, and the energy of this book stayed with me. And it was about 6 months ago, maybe a year ago, that suddenly it all just came back to my head. It just popped back into the forefront of my imagination. The illustrations, the look of the book, and with a little bit of Googling, a little bit of experimentation, I rediscovered the Saga of Erik the Viking. And I'm happy to say that it was like embracing a familiar old friend. This book means an awful lot to me. My strongest childhood memories of this book are of its artwork, in particular the cover of the book. This striking image of a Viking ship, a drakkar, about to sail off the edge of the world, framed by beautiful knotwork, with an even more striking image of that same ship being sucked into a whirlpool on the back, utterly arrested my attention as a child. I was enthralled by this book. It had a mystique, an allure, a sort of danger to it that I can only really liken to being in the presence, perhaps, of a spell book, an ancient manuscript or something like that. In the hands of my father, this book felt very much like something that was best handled by grown-ups, something which, as a child, I wanted to know more about, but I was scared that I might somehow be sucked into it, or otherwise hypnotized by its contents. And that's no accident. This book is simply brimming with subtle references to ancient texts. In fact, in the dust jacket, it proudly exclaims, "This is the tale of a Viking warrior who lived hundreds and hundreds of years ago. His name was Erik, his ship was called Golden Dragon, and its figurehead was a fierce monster carved out of wood and covered with gold leaf." On the other end of the book, on the other side of the dust jacket, we are reminded that the author, Terry Jones, was actually first and foremost, a scholar of English at Oxford University. He may well be a member of Monty Python, but he's also someone who really knows his literature. And that, I think, is the reason why this book feels right. It feels like it could be almost from an ancient time. With that ancient manuscript feeling in mind, the structure of this book very much follows suit. Each chapter is a contained story, for the most part, of and unto itself. In a similar way to a saga, each small adventure adds to the grand story, in this case the story of Erik the Viking. Similarly as well, these are stories that I think are meant to be read out loud, like ancient literature. These are stories that are best told to other people, and indeed over the course of about 10 weeks I shared these stories with Mrs. Soup as a bedtime ritual, and she absolutely adored them. She loved hearing the adventure, but also as a former classicist herself, really enjoyed how Terry Jones wove a modern sensibility, a modern imagination in with ancient literary devices and echoes of ancient ways of telling stories. This is a roving, roaming story, but told in a very familiar way. And it's worth reading a little bit. I've actually bookmarked a section here called The Old Man of the Sea. After their encounter with the sea dragon, Erik and his men looked at their ship, Golden Dragon, and saw that the monster had done much damage to the stern. Water was flooding in. "We must bail this water out," said Erik, "or we shall not keep afloat for long." "But how can we bail?" cried his men. "We have not one single bucket between us. We are lost for sure." "Then we must use our helmets," said Erik, and he got down with his men and started to bail the water out of Golden Dragon with his own helmet. But the more they bailed the water out, the more water seemed to flood in. "We shall sink before nightfall," whispered Erik's men to one another. "Unless we reach land, we are dead men," they said. Thorkild stood by the great oar at the back of the ship and steered. "But I don't know where we are," he said to himself, "nor have I any idea in which the direction of land might be. I fear we are lost for sure." Just then Thorkild saw a shape in the water that looked as if it were following the boat. Thorkild watched and watched this shape, and it seemed to him that it was an old man swimming all alone in the sea. "Hey there!" cried out Thorkild. "Who are you, swimming alone in the icy waves so far from land?" The old man looked out of the water at Thorkild and laughed, but said not a word. "How do you come to swim so fast?" asked Thorkild. Again the old man in the water looked up and laughed, but again he said not a word. "Can you help us find land?" asked Thorkild, "for we are badly damaged and we will sink before nightfall." At this the old man did not laugh. He looked up at Thorkild and said, "I'll show you land, but if I do, one of you must come and join me in the icy waves." Thorkild felt a sudden cold to the marrow of his bones, for he knew that this was the old man of the sea, and that to join him in the icy waves meant certain death. But he said to the old man of the sea, "Show us where to find land." The old man of the sea laughed and replied, "But which one of you will come and join me in the icy waves?" "Show us land, and I shall come and join you in the icy waves." When Thorkild had said these words, the old man of the sea laughed again, and took the great oar in his hands, and turned it until Golden Dragon was heading due north. In that little section there, we have elements of ancient literature, repetition, for example, of in that interaction between Thorkild and the old man. Once, twice, thrice, this kind of thing. We have a chorus of Erik's men, "What shall we do? We are lost." While the hero goes, "We shall do this," or "we." It's all echoes of ancient Greek, Old Norse, Old English literature, which Terry Jones is undoubtedly aware of and has used in the telling of these stories. And so, as the story progresses, because of that richness, because of the fact that he is writing or was writing in the 80s, we don't know where his story is going to go, but we are somehow anchored by the form of the story. It feels similar to these ancient texts. It feels, frankly, similar to maybe a Bible story, perhaps, that you might have heard as a child. These are ancient and well-trodden ways of telling stories, and Jones is a skillful storyteller. Now, I don't want to spoil this story for you. That little excerpt about the Old Man of the Sea comes from fairly early on in Erik's adventure. And there are so many adventures, and the final destination for Erik and his friends, Ragnar, Forkbeard, Thorkild, Sven the Strong, it is worthwhile discovering for yourself. So I'm not going to talk any more about the structure or the text of the book. But the illustrations absolutely deserve a closer examination. I've already talked about how the cover art for this book just kept me enthralled and intrigued as a child, but it also is the perfect accompaniment to this story. Now that sort of goes without saying. Most stories with illustrations have a wonderful balance between the two, but in this case the imagery is so evocative, so mysterious, so beautifully rendered, that actually when I did as a child curiously look towards the end of the book to see what our heroes might be doing, what they might be getting up to, it was hard to know, really, because the images are so directly connected to the text that, for example, this image here of snakes above the ship did nothing really to spoil the story. Rather, they made me wonder, how? What's going on there? I need to know. And so we eventually got to that point where there were snakes raining down on our heroes. The balance, I suppose, between imagination and the requirements of the story as an unfolding adventure is very, very fine. And actually I found it very helpful when I was reading this book with Mrs. Soup to be able to refer to certain images at certain times, just to give her a context for her imaginings. For example, here we have one of our heroes holding up the Star Sword, and there's enough going on there that it anchors you, gives you a little punctuation mark for what you're imagining, and then you can just run with the text from there. In that sense, the artist, I think, is very sensitive to the needs of the story. It probably would have been very tempting to overbear this text with imagery and to make it more about the art than about the imagination, but that's not what happens. There's just enough, and the art style is just dreamy enough, just magical enough that you are given ownership, as it were, of the adventure as you read it. The pictures simply help you along the way. It's magnificent. So there you have it, the Saga of Erik the Viking. Once again, I've managed not to review an archaeology textbook for you, but today I simply had to share this book. It is so important to me, and absolutely, in more ways than one, set me on a path to becoming the person I am today. This book did become part of my personality. That's really hard to deny. And it's because of the richness of the story and the imagery and the fact that my dad read it to me when I was so young, and the fact that it is genuinely a great book. As I say, from the standpoint of a grown-up archaeologist, it's really interesting to see how the devices of ancient literature, these stories that were originally spoken out loud and then eventually written down, are used and deployed by Jones in this text, and used to such fresh effect, so as to keep you guessing on the journey yourself. Even the most weary ancient text reader and storyteller will find something interesting and intriguing in this book. So I strongly recommend it, and I think you, if you can, should give it a go. In fact, with that in mind, I have here a second copy of the Saga of Erik the Viking. It's a different edition. This is a paperback copy compared to my hardback edition, but it is the same book, the same imagery, the same text, the same magical saga of Erik, and I want to give away this version to one of you fine folks. All you need to do is comment below or maybe email me at archaeosoup@gmail.com with the reason that you want to go on an adventure with Erik the Viking. Maybe even turn your reasoning into a brief epic poem, maybe like 4 lines of epicness. And the winner will receive this, free of charge, no post cost or anything like that. I want to give this book away and one of you guys will get it. So yeah, comment below, email me, do what you have to do, send a carrier pigeon, so long as it gets here by the end of October. And one of you will win the Saga of Erik the Viking. I can't wait to share it with you. As ever guys, until next time, do take care. Bye bye.